So Tom, how fantastic to see you again. We've met in various podcasting contexts a number of times, and of course I've known you for years, and I always love talking to you. So thank you for coming on for another conversation.
Thank you, Catherine, for I was going to say putting up with me, but it's not. I don't quite mean that, but it's.
Yes, I think that's what, because we're British, Tom, we can say that to each other.
Yes.
Putting up with one another is the British way of saying we love each other totally.
Exactly.
So, allowing for the Britishness of it all. So I wanted to have a chat with you today because I'd heard about this, what sounds like incredible retreat thing you were doing in September, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, September the 23rd to the 30th. Yeah.
Wow. So that sounds amazing. And I wanted to hear more about it, but I also wanted to kind of chuck in a few things I'd like to say about retreats. You know, over the years, I've been on numerous retreats myself, and they have really made a difference to my life. And I think one of the things about them that I've really noticed is I never know what difference they're going to make before I go. And the reason for that is that when I go on a retreat, I go into my mind goes into a different kind of state because I relax and I'm not having to get my job done or achieve anything. I'm outside my normal context. I'm surrounded by other people who are all there for the same reason, usually in a beautiful location. And so I go into a completely different, I mean, my brain waves probably do something completely different from usual. And I have my imagination comes through. So of course I don't know what's going to happen because I'm in a different frame of mind from the one I'm normally in. So I can't predict it. But I always come out renewed and refreshed and with more imagination and well-resourced. So hence thinking, what a great thing that you're doing this. And I've got a few questions I'd like to ask you. So perhaps people listening and watching can get a better understanding of where you might be coming from in putting this together and offering it out, because it's for leaders, isn't it, specifically?
It is for leaders and those who aspire to leadership, but essentially those who have a responsibility for people beyond themselves.
Yeah, great. So that is a subsection of the population. It's people with particular, because I think it's quite challenging at the moment in the world. I mean, it's always challenging being a leader, but particularly at the moment after the kind of disruptive time we've had. And you've been working with leaders for a long time. What's your observation of the sorts of challenges that are most common at the moment with leaders?
Well, there's always uncertainty. And I think for some years now, we've advocated the whole principle of managing ambiguity. In other words, not having linear thinking and it not being binary, yes, no, on, off, red, well, black, white, whatever it is. Yeah. I think some leaders have engaged with that much more than others. But we've had a pandemic, we've got a war, and we've got some extraordinary things that are going on in the political arenas, not just in this country, but really in many countries. And so all of that leads to more uncertainty. And on top of that, I think particularly the pandemic, but also if you look at organizations in the past, they used to dictate what society thought. But I think now society has its own momentum. And a lot of organizations are now being pushed to consider the thinking of their people in a new way. I remember that when I was coaching a CEO, and the person who left his office just as I was going to go in had just announced that as from Monday, she wanted to be called he. and you've never come across this before. So there are all these different pressures and tensions, and whilst there've always been caring CEOs, I think the whole concept of mental well-being, neurodiversity, are concepts that I think still a lot of leaders in organizations are frankly don't know how to engage with at all.
Yeah.
Well,
it's hard enough to do it at home in our own families, isn't it?
Yes.
Frankly, or in our own heads, let alone trying to keep an eye on the wellness of an entire organization. So I think you're right. It's very, very challenging. I think that's always been challenging for leaders, in my experience as well, working with them. I feel like most leaders actually are very benevolent in that regard and would like their people to have good, would like to have goodwill and people feeling fulfilled. I think most of the people I've ever dealt with, that's been the case. But many of them have said to me exactly as you're saying, it's not always easy to see what to do, especially if you're exhausted yourself.
Exactly. Yes. That's very true. And I think that because of I was just talking to a guy earlier on today, CEO of a startup, and there's 3 founders, him in Ireland, one in Canada, and one, I can't remember, in the Far East somewhere. And they're the 3 founders of the organization. And they've got some work that's going on in India. And it's like, that really wouldn't have happened before the pandemic, I don't think. So there's this spread. And apart from anything else, of course, that means that many more organizations are operating a 24-hour clock. And the demands on leaders is that much greater. And it not least in them being able to set boundaries for themselves. When am I going to switch off? When am I actually going to be at home and not looking at emails? I think these challenges have always been considerable for C-suite members, but now much more.
Yes, because at least back in the day, when it was only in one's own time zone, at 3 o'clock in the morning, one was not going to receive a phone call.
Yeah.
But now, at any point in time, things might be kicking off in one of the sites somewhere else altogether. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's very challenging.
Yeah. And so I think the call for energy for leaders, I mean, if you're a founder or you're an entrepreneur, or I think particularly with them, but also CEOs of more established businesses, they need to keep going. They need to keep this sort of sense of what I call drive.
Yeah.
And the question is, where does your drive come from? And how do you manage that? That's one of the fundamental questions that I'm sort of really focused on. And for me, the retreat is really aimed at helping people begin to explore that drive, and hence the title, Leading Through the Void, because it's like the drive comes from within us somehow.
Yes.
I mean, I've been asking people on LinkedIn, what drives you? And people come up and they say, oh, well, I've got to support my family, or I really feel like this is the right thing to do, or something. But then when you start to unpick that and you say, yeah, that's fine, but where does that drive come from? And then most of them say, I actually have no idea.
Yeah.
And all the time that you can't identify it, you can't meet it. then the question is, who's driving who?
Indeed. And of course, all those drives, those immediate answers people come up with, they're not wrong, are they?
No.
They're just not the thinnest end of the wedge. They're sort of part way up the wedge, aren't they? So they're what's been understandable and understood to that point. So they're not wrong. I mean, in my experience, this question of asking about our own drive and where it comes from, to me, is a question that's worth asking repeatedly in life. Because I don't know about you, Thom, but in my experience, I find I feel like I kind of get closer to what it is over time. You know, when in my 20s or even my teenage years, I thought I knew absolutely what it was. You know, I mean, I knew what I was capable of knowing then. And then as time's gone on, at different points, I've really examined it and got a better clarity. So because some people watching this will be thinking, perhaps, well, I know what drives me. I went on a vision retreat up a mountain or a warrior workshop or something 20 years ago, and I was really clear what my drive was. And I suppose my thought about that is, well, that's probably absolutely true. And then as we evolve and as things change around us, it's fantastic to go back and look again, isn't it? It's fantastic to take it out again and go, well, can I go a bit deeper? Can I learn even more about that, more nuanced? Do you feel like the people who are coming along, because I know you've got a nice group growing already for this retreat, are there like a mixture of people who are looking at this sort of thing for the first time and people who are looking at it for the 5th, 6th, 7th time going to be working together?
Well, it's a little bit of a spread of both, but I think mostly it's people who are quite tired and are looking for an understanding of what this is about. So probably at the early stages of an exploration.
Yeah.
And I think for some people it's actually kind of scary because, well, what do I need to know what this drive is? Where does it come from, and what does that? How does that serve me? Because I remember working with one of the global banks a little while ago, and we were running a program around leadership and communication, and the sponsor was promoted, and he went off to New York, and the new guy who was also an American came in, and he called me in. He said, "What's this program?" And I said, "Well, it's leadership, communication." And he said, "It's not going to change them, is it?" And I said, "Well, actually, yes. That is the idea." And he said, "Well, I don't want it. I want them on the desk. I want them making money." And it was a real sort of wake up that me and my naivety, just expecting everybody to want to develop their people. Actually, for some people, the priorities are very different.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Of course. But I think one of the things about being a leader is that you can't be just thinking about yourself, can you? You've got to be thinking about your people as well. And let's say a leader reaches a point where they think, well, I'm pretty happy with where I've got to, right? But then what about all those other people that you're leading, many of whom actually want to be growing? Do you not want to continue to be learning and expanding and growing in order to be better able to help them? Because that's one of the things as a leader, it goes beyond, am I just getting my needs met right now? It goes way beyond that to, am I helping my people get their needs met such that they can be really fulfilled and achieving what they want to achieve? So it's a different level of demand, I think, when we're a leader.
I love your positivity. I think my experience of leaders is a little different to yours, and I think that's a kind of a credit to you, and the energy you put out and the people that you attract to you are of that ilk that you have just described.
Yeah.
Because I think that there are all sorts of leaders out there, and they're motivated by different things.
Mm.
And I suppose I don't know, because I've been, I suppose because I'm an ex-Marine, people think that, you know, I can deal with all the tough nuts and the problems. But I've been asked in organizations very often to come in and coach somebody who is causing damage. You know, in the banks, they call it making noise. There's too much noise around this person. And there's always this reticence to deal with it because that person is probably making more money than anybody else.
Yes.
But they're making it at the expense of something, and it's normally the people around them.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great motivator for me. It's part of what drives me, is to help people see the impact that they are having on the people around them. You know, to what end are you driving this organization? To what end are you driving the goals? When you set a budget, are you aware of the consequences of the numbers that you're putting on a spreadsheet, which some people have spent months working on?
Yeah.
And you just hit them with a 30% this and a 40% that. Very arbitrary sort of imposition on top of things. And, you know, I've seen people sort of reeling under the effects of this kind of decision. And so I suppose it's paradox, really, because they're probably the most difficult people to attract to a retreat like this, because they're much too busy doing their thing. But actually, they're the ones who could benefit the most, not just for themselves, as you've described, but also for the people around them, above them, and certainly below them.
Yes.
And I don't know whether I'm just naive, but those are the people more than any others that I would love to invite to come to a place like Likatitlan to actually explore themselves, because it's such a release. And, you know, because I've seen people and they come up and they say, God, bloody hell, I've been a real so-and-so, haven't I? And you don't even have to agree with it, because they know. And all of a sudden there's this new being, which actually was always there, but it had been eclipsed or suppressed. And this new person says, huh, I can do all sorts of things, but I don't need to use this hard edge that I've used up until now.
Right. So we're not saying come to this retreat and find out what a bastard you are. What we're saying is, spend a lot of money and take a week out and find out what a bastard you are. We're not saying that. We're saying take a week out, possibly get a bit of a better understanding of some of the impacts you're having, and discover the pure spirit that lies within all along.
I love that.
And look at how that can come out more and manifest more. And I think probably, Thom, you and I agree on a lot of levels. I probably communicate in a slightly different way from you about all of it, but you know, I think people are happier when they have done that sort of exploration. I think they're happier when they discover that behind the, in quotes, potentially bastard.
Well, let's be nice and say it's a facade. It's a facade.
Exactly. Actually is a perfectly good, decent person who would like a bit more free reign, perhaps. But I think, you know, another thing for leaders is that constant pressure of delivering to the bottom line.
Yes.
Unfortunate belief that a lot of people have, which is, if I allow myself to be a bit more flexible, a bit more empathetic, and so forth, that by definition means taking my foot off the gas pedal for achieving the bottom line. And in my experience, that's not actually how it works. In my experience.
And also, I think there's a fear of being perceived as weak.
Yeah, definitely.
And that is, I think, very often it's because at some stage I have been judged as being weak.
Yeah.
And that was really not a nice experience. So I'm not going to do that. I am going to project this facade of tough. And I can prove that by my numbers.
Yeah.
But actually, it has a cost. That's the point. It has a cost, not just to the people around and actually to the business, but to the individual as well.
Totally.
And I think there are an awful lot of people out there who are, you know, in society judges them awfully successful, and yet inside they're not happy.
Mm.
You know, what is success, and does it make me happy? And I think history and current events and current experience would suggest it doesn't. It doesn't. And so, what's all this drive about? And would a bit of self-care be such a bad thing?
Yeah. And actually, people do go off on holiday, don't they, for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And what you're talking about is they go off on a holiday, which is actually very useful, as opposed to an opportunity to gain a lot of weight and top up one's alcohol quotient.
Well,
Just...
not only that, actually, if you look at people who go away for 2 weeks, the first week, if they can put their phone down at all, they're beginning to unwind. And the body then says in the second week, this is not bad. Since you're relaxing, we can now get rid of some of the toxins you've been building up over the last year. So they get sick. And they come back, and a lot of them are still not awfully well. And then they got to go back to work.
Yeah.
And it's not a positive cycle, really. You know, because the moment you relax, the body will try and eliminate all the poisons that you've been accumulating, and that typically comes out as some kind of illness.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be amazing if you were actually in your own state and under control of yourself to the extent that you were eliminating these things as you went along, so that there wasn't this build-up?
Yes, that's right. Someone said a great thing the other day, that they said something along the lines of, the goal is to be living a life that you don't need to try to escape from, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, when they go on holiday, they're trying to get an escape from their life rather than celebrate the fact that their life is great. And that's not true for everybody, of course. No. Thom, if somebody wanted to know more about this retreat and explore whether or not it's right for them, can they contact you and have a chat about it?
I would love them to do that. Yes, they can find me on LinkedIn, Thom Dennis, Thom Dennis, and the website for the retreat is Leading Through the Void, all one word. How amazing it is to actually have a sense of what that void is and how to embrace it. I think one of the things that's really scary is that people would say, well, like my example of the banker, you know, I don't want them to stop driving. Well, that's fine, but let's do that from a much more conscious place, so that it's much easier to set boundaries. It's much easier to care for yourself. It's much easier to have a sense of the people around you and the impact you're having.
Yes.
Isn't that a fantastic opportunity?
Yeah. And presumably everyone's going to learn from each other on this retreat as well. They're going to meet in fantastic networking opportunity.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah. There's lots of side benefits as well. I mean, it's got a spa and, you know, with massage and yoga and all that kind of stuff as well.
Fantastic. And is it, you know, reassuringly expensive? Because I always think, you know, these these good events, they need to be expensive because then people actually properly invest in themselves when they go.
Yeah, well, the price is set just over $9,000 for the week, but what we've said is that there are some scholarships available for those people who are not going to be sponsored by their companies, because what a company looks at and judges what's value is quite different to how an individual will see these things. Yes. So I think it's important that whatever level, financial level that the person's at, we should be able to accommodate that. But certainly, I think it's extremely good value. And all they've got to do is get themselves to Guatemala City, and we'll take them from there to the venue. I mean, you can only get to it by boat. It's quite special.
Sounds amazing.
So we'll look after them, and yeah, it'll be great.
Beautiful. Well, I just like to acknowledge Thom, because putting on events like this is quite a generous and risky thing to do, because you never know how many people are going to want to come. You never know if there's going to be people having dramas in the last week beforehand or whatever. You just never know. You never know if it's going to be a rainstorm for the entire week. You just don't know. And you don't have to do it, do you? You don't have to do it. You could just be coaching everybody, happily pootling along. But no, you've decided to go out on a limb and offer this retreat. So I think kudos to you, sir. And, gratitude to you for doing it, because I think it's a bold thing to do and a great contribution.
Catherine, you're kind. I appreciate those words, particularly from you.
Oh, bless you. So before we wind up, because we're just about to run out of time, is there anything else that you'd like to make sure you'd like to say before we finish?
I'd really encourage people, if they've been tickled at all by this, to get in touch and let's have a conversation. This is not just for heavy hitters, or it's for people who are curious about themselves and want to actually be better leaders. And for organizations, they will get a better leader back. Yeah. And that's kind of what it's about, really. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Thom, Dennis, thank you very much for another conversation. And I know that leading through the void is going to be amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine.